Every morning starts the same for me. 7:00, the alarm clock rings. I don't let it go off for more than 5 seconds. It's a habit from when Agnes slept next to me. "Julian," she used to say, "you're the only person I know who wakes up a second before the alarm clock to turn it off." Now Agnes has been gone for 9 years, but I still turn off the alarm clock just as quickly. I get up from the bed, which I always make at once. I smooth the folds in the bedspread with my hands exactly 3 times. My flip-flops are already exactly where they should be, by the right nightstand, toes off the bed. I put them on and go to the bathroom, where I perform a sequence of 19 actions, always in the same order. Brushing teeth, exactly 3 minutes, timed. Showering, 5 minutes, not a second more. I prefer to shave with a dangerous razor, as I have done all my life. Young people nowadays don't understand what a real shave means. There's something meditative about it, especially when you hold a sharp blade to your own throat. By 8 o'clock, I am fully dressed. My clothes are unchanging: a starched white shirt, dark gray pants with arrows, a cardigan even in warm weather. "You look like a character from an old movie, Mr. Nye," the postmistress, a young woman with tattoos on her arms and headphones always sticking out of her ears, said to me once. She didn't realize it was a compliment to me. In my day, men dressed like men, not teenagers. In my 76 years, I'm not going to wear those ridiculous t-shirts or, God forbid, sweatpants outside the house. Breakfast doesn't change either. Oatmeal on water, 1 piece of toast with butter, a glass of orange juice and black coffee. During breakfast, I look through my day planner, although there's rarely anything new in there. Doctor's appointments are once every 3 months. Paying bills, the first of every month. Grocery shopping, every Tuesday and Friday. Life in Wilmington flows at a measured pace, especially in our suburb, lined with identical houses with neat lawns. After breakfast, I arrange my pills for the day: blood pressure, heart medication, vitamins, and a handful of others. How many people my age could do without this pharmacy? Not many, I suppose. I'm still lucky. I can still walk, cook, and keep the house in order on my own. Unlike Harold Pierce from the next street over, who recently fell and broke his hip. He's now in a nursing home where nurses change his diapers. No, I'd rather die in my own bed. At 9 o'clock, I sit in a chair by the window with a newspaper. It's one of the few things I still can't get used to. Reading the news from a screen. I need the paper, the smell of printing ink, the rustle of the pages. Cordelia teases me about it all the time. "Dad, you're the only person under 100 years old who still subscribes to a paper newspaper." I never reply that she's the only daughter who thinks it's okay to mock her father's habits. The newspaper is a ritual. First the international news, then the national, then the local. I skip sports. I've never been interested. But I always read the obituaries carefully. At my age, it's practically a social chronicle. You get to know who of your acquaintances has left this world. Sometimes there are names of people I worked with in court. Judge Bernstein died last year. D.A. Lawrence 3 months earlier. Time spares no one. After the paper, I check my bills, even though most of them are already set up for automatic payment. It's a habit left over from the days when I used to keep the family budget by putting checks in envelopes. Agnes never understood why I was so meticulous about keeping track of every dime. "Julian, we're not poor," she'd say. But it wasn't about the money. It was about order. Order is the only thing that keeps you sane in a chaotic world. For 39 years, I worked as a court stenographer. 39 years I recorded the words that were spoken in the courtroom, the testimony of witnesses, the arguments of defense attorneys, jury verdicts, judges' verdicts. My fingers flew over the keyboard of a stenographic machine, recording every word with an accuracy that would be envied. You know what's interesting about being a stenographer? It's like you don't exist in the courtroom. You're invisible, part of the furniture. People are oblivious to your presence and speak as if no one can hear them except the people they're addressing. I've seen families fall apart in divorce trials, people confess to murders, rape victims tell their stories in tears. I've recorded cases of fraud, of corruption, of child abuse. All the darkest sides of human nature pass through my fingers, turning into smooth lines of stenographic symbols. When Cordelia was little, she often asked me about work. "Daddy, what did you do today?" And I always answered the same way. "Writing down words, honey, just writing down words." I couldn't tell her that those words described how a father beat his children until they passed out, or how a husband slowly poisoned his wife with arsenic, or how a bank teller stole the retirement savings of the elderly. How could anyone tell a child such a thing? At 11 o'clock, I get ready for my daily walk. I put on more comfortable shoes. Arthritis makes itself known if the shoes aren't right. I take a cane, not because I can't walk without it, but as a safety net in case I get dizzy. That happens when my blood pressure spikes. I check to see if I have my cell phone, although I usually have no one to call. My route is unchanged: 2 hours, 4 miles around the perimeter of the neighborhood. Past the Kingsley house, where Mrs. Kingsley is always tinkering in the garden, weather permitting. Past the elementary school, where the children play noisily at recess. Through a small park with a pond where ducks swim. Along a row of stores where I sometimes stop for a coffee. And then the way back home. As I walk, I think. Thinking about the past more often than the future. At my age, the future is a concept with pretty clear boundaries. I reflect on the cases I've written down, about the people whose stories have passed through me. I wonder what happened to Jennifer Wright, the young woman who testified against her rapist stepfather 20 years ago. Was she able to build a normal life after what happened to her? And what about Michael Stone, the kid who was convicted of burglary? He swore he would reform. Did he keep his promise? These unanswered questions fill my head as I walk around. Sometimes I remember the good moments, rare acquittals of the innocent, touching adoptions, fair decisions in civil cases. But somehow, the darker stories leave a deeper mark. When I get home, it's usually around 1 p.m. on the clock. I make myself a light lunch, soup or a sandwich, nothing complicated thing. Agnes was a great cook, and I never learned to cook anything but the simplest of dishes. After she died, I tried to master some of her recipes, but they never turned out as good. Eventually, I gave up and accepted the fact that some things just can't be replicated. After lunch, I usually read. My library is one of the few things I'm truly proud of. Classics, historical novels, biographies. Nothing of modern literature. Most new books seem superficial to me. I reread the old masters, Dickens, Tolstoy, Hemingway. There is a weight in their words that is sorely lacking in today's authors. Sometimes, if the weather is particularly nice, I sit in the backyard. I have a small garden that I keep in decent condition. Agnes loved flowers, especially roses. I kept her rose bushes and care for them the way she taught me. It's another way to keep some of her presence in my life. At 4 o'clock, I usually turn on the TV to watch the news. Not because I'm interested. Most of the news now is just a repetition of the same thing in different wording. But it creates background noise in a too quiet house. Sometimes I even talk to the newscasters, commenting on their messages. Of course they would say that. What nonsense. In my day, such a thing was unthinkable. Is talking to the TV the first sign of senile dementia? Maybe. But when you live alone, you begin to appreciate even the illusion of company. At 5:30, the phone rings. I know who it is before I even pick it up. Cordelia always calls at the same time, like she's put a reminder on her calendar, "Call my father." Maybe she did. "Hello, Daddy." Her voice sounds cheerful, but with that special intonation one uses when talking to very young children or very old people. "Hello, Cordelia," I answered. "How are you today? Did you take your medication?" Always the same questions, as if I wasn't capable of taking care of my own health. Of course I did. I don't forget. "Okay, Dad. I'm just worried about you. I never tell her that if she was really worried, she'd stop by more than once a month. Are you eating well? The next question on her list. Yes, Cordelia, I eat regularly. Dad, you know what I mean. Vegetables, fruit, protein. Not just canned and frozen dinners. I sigh. In my 76 years, I have to account for my diet like a schoolboy. I eat normally. Today's lunch was vegetable soup and a chicken sandwich. This reassures her, even though the soup was from a can and the chicken was vacuum-packed. But why go into detail? Listen, Daddy, her voice changes, getting a little higher. I immediately realize that she's about to say something I won't like. Peregrine and I were thinking of coming over Friday night. Have dinner. What do you say? That's it. A Friday night visit. It happens every few months, usually when they want something from me. Probably money again. Last time it was help paying for their vacation to Cape Cod. Before that it was a loan for a kitchen remodel. They never call it a gift, always a loan, even though we all know full well that the money will never come back to me. Friday, I repeat, as if mulling over the offer, as if I had any other plans. Yes, Friday would be fine. Great. She sounds excited, but I know it's not because of the prospect of spending time with me. We'll bring dinner. You don't have to cook anything. Okay, I agree. What time should I expect you? How about 6:30? And Dad, don't clean on purpose. We're not coming to check on the cleanliness of your house. But I know that if the floor doesn't shine and the dust isn't wiped from every surface, Cordelia is bound to notice and comment on it. Dad, are you sure you're up to the task of cleaning? Maybe you should hire a helper. And then a string of questions about my finances will follow, because an au pair is an expense that Cordelia thinks I could avoid if I agreed to move to a place with care. She never calls it a nursing home, but we both know what she means. I won't, I lie. Of course I'll clean. I always clean before they arrive, like I'm getting ready for an inspection. See you Friday then, Dad. Take care of yourself. See you Friday, Cordelia. I hang up and look at the phone. Our conversation lasted exactly 4 minutes, even shorter than usual. I wonder if she ever asks herself why our conversations are so short and shallow. Does she realize how much we've become strangers to each other? Was I a bad father? Sometimes I think about it. I provided for the family, never drank, never cheated on Agnes, never raised a hand to Cordelia. But was I emotionally available? Hardly. After a day spent recording other people's tragedies, I'd come home emotionally drained. I needed time in silence to recover. Agnes understood that. Cordelia didn't. I'm looking at my watch. 5 hours and 36 minutes. Another day comes to an end, almost indistinguishable from the last. Tomorrow I'll wake up at 7:00, turn off the alarm 5 seconds later, and it will start all over again. That's how my life goes now, in the quiet, methodical rhythm I've created for myself. And oddly enough, I'm fine with it. At least that's what I tell myself. But now, after Cordelia's call, there's a change in my routine. Friday night dinner, a visit from my daughter and son-in-law, an invasion of my carefully organized space. And somewhere deep inside, I feel an anxiety I'm trying to suppress. Because every time they visit, something changes, and usually not for the better. By Friday, I had cleaned the entire house. Despite Cordelia's promise not to, I spent 2 days thoroughly cleaning. Mopped the floors, wiped down every surface, even took down and washed the curtains in the living room. My back protested at such activity, but I ignored the pain. There was something soothing about this methodical work, about turning a space into an immaculately clean one. I hate clutter. Maybe it's an occupational deformity, 39 years of recording the chaos of human lives, laying it out in neat stenographic symbols. Or maybe it's just old age. When you can't control the world around you, you start to control your immediate environment. At 6 hours and 20 minutes, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Peregrine always arrives a little before the appointed time, as if he's hoping to catch me off guard. I pulled on my sweater and walked to the window. Their silver Volvo is parked in the driveway. Cordelia got out first, a paper bag of groceries in her hands. Peregrine is behind her, carrying a bottle of wine. I open the door before they can even ring the bell. "Daddy!" Cordelia kisses me on the cheek. She smells like expensive perfume, too much for my taste. "How are you?" "Hello, Cordelia. I'm fine," I answer, taking the bag of groceries. "Peregrine, good evening." My brother-in-law shakes my hand. He has a firm handshake, one of the few things I respect about him. "Julian," he nods, "brought good wine. French." He says it with a peculiar intonation, as if I should be impressed. Peregrine has always been a bit of a snob about these things. The curator of the city's greenhouse with a claim to exquisite taste. "Come in." I step back, letting them into the house. They enter, and I see Cordelia's eyes scan the room. Looking for dust? Clutter? Signs that her father has finally started slipping into senile dementia? "Oh, Daddy, it's so clean," she says with mild surprise. "Did you hire someone to clean it?" "No," I answer dryly. "I'm still capable of holding a mop." Peregrine grins, taking off his coat. "I must say, Julian, for a man of your age, you're holding up well. A man of your age." It's like I'm some ancient artifact that somehow still functions. I feel like reminding him that at my age, many men are still working, traveling, living life to the fullest, but I don't. There's no point in starting the evening with a confrontation. "I brought steaks," Cordelia heads for the kitchen, "and potatoes for baking, and salad, of course. You don't eat enough greens, Dad, I'm sure." She opens the refrigerator, and I can see her eyes assessing the contents. "Yeah, there's not a lot of fresh produce in there, mostly things that keep for a long time. When you live alone, it's hard to buy food that spoils quickly." "You have almost nothing in the fridge," she comments disapprovingly. "How do you eat?" "I eat enough, Cordelia. It's just that I was at the store the day before yesterday, and I was planning my next trip for tomorrow." She shakes her head, clearly disbelieving. Cordelia makes herself at home in the kitchen, opening the cabinets, pulling out a frying pan, finding a cutting board. She's always loved cooking, ever since she was a teenager. It's one of the few hobbies she has left from those times. Peregrine pours wine into glasses. He's not pouring me much. "You can't have too much, can you? With your medication? One glass is fine," I say, though I could really drink more. But Peregrine's right. With my pills, it's not worth the risk. "How's your work going, Peregrine?" I ask, sipping my wine. It's really good, though I've never been much of a connoisseur. He sighs with the kind of theatricality that always seemed fake to me. "It's difficult, Julian. The city council cut the budget again. Can you imagine? We had to stop buying new orchids for the tropical section, and I've already arranged for a supplier from Thailand. Peregrine is always complaining about the budget, yet I notice that his clothes are always expensive. The watch on his arm costs more than I ever spent on accessories, and his and Cordelia's vacations are always to exotic places. For people who talk about lack of money all the time, they live amazingly well." "It's sad," I say neutrally. "But maybe in the current economic situation, exotic orchids aren't the first necessity for the city." His face tenses slightly. "Culture and beauty are always a necessity, Julian. It's what separates us from the animals. But of course, people of your generation have a hard time understanding that. There's that condescending tone again, as if I'm some caveman who can't appreciate the subtleties of modern life. I've spent most of my career recording the testimony of professors, experts, people in the arts. I probably know more about culture than he does with his botany degree." Cordelia intervenes, sensing the tension building. "Dad, I notice your sweater is frayed at the elbows. You need to update your closet." And there it is, another criticism. My sweater may not be new, but it's clean, comfortable, and fully functional. I don't need to impress anyone. "My sweater is perfectly adequate for my needs," I reply. Besides, why spend money on new clothes at my age? Don't say that, Cordelia exclaims, flipping the stakes. You sound like you're going to die tomorrow. You still have many years ahead of you. I'm not sure if she's saying it for my comfort or her own. Sometimes I think my death scares her, not as the loss of my father, but as an inevitable confrontation with her own mortality. In any case, she continues, you should take better care of yourself. Have you lost weight since our last visit? Actually, my weight hasn't changed in years, but Cordelia always finds something to worry about. My weight is normal, I say. Dr. Harris didn't express any concern at my last checkup. When was that? She asks suspiciously. 3 weeks ago. It's true. I don't skip medical checkups, unlike many of my peers. I'm well aware that staying healthy is the only way to maintain my independence. As Cordelia finishes with dinner, I notice Peregrine moving slowly around the living room, looking at things. His gaze lingers on the antique clock I inherited from my father, the silver tea set that Agnes and I received as a wedding present, on the collection of first editions I've collected over the years. I know what he's doing, evaluating, cataloging, estimating value, like a vulture circling over prey that's still alive. I've seen that look before, when they came over after Agnes died, supposedly to help me sort through her things. Cordelia had taken all her jewelry then, as a keepsake, of course, though I've never seen her wear Mom's pearl necklace or sapphire earrings. Dinner is ready, Cordelia announced, setting the plates on the dining room table. Daddy, sit at the head of the table. We sit down, and I have to admit that the food looks good. The steaks are cooked perfectly, the potatoes are ruddy, the salad is fresh. Cordelia has always been a good cook, having inherited that talent from Agnes. It looks great, I say sincerely. Thank you, Cordelia. She smiles, and for a moment I see her as the little girl who was so eager to earn my praise. What happened to us? When did we become such strangers? Bon appetit, Peregrine says, raising his glass. To family reunions. We drink, and there is silence for a while, broken only by the sound of cutlery. The food is really good, and I find that I have a good appetite despite the tension. Dad, Cordelia begins after a few moments of silence, have you heard about the city's new retiree benefits program? Yeah, I read about it in the paper, I answer, cutting off a bite of steak. They're increasing the benefits by 10%. That's good, right? She smiles. Extra money never hurts. I suppose so, I say, although I think the system for distributing those benefits is unfair. Peregrine raises an eyebrow. What do you mean, Julian? In the sense that they are distributed equally, without taking into account a person's real contribution to society, I explain. A man who has worked all his life, paid taxes, raised children, gets the same amount as someone who has barely worked or lived on welfare most of his life. I see Peregrine's face darken. He's always been an advocate of social justice in its most primitive form, giving everyone equally, regardless of merit. That's a very conservative viewpoint, he says with obvious disapproval. You're suggesting that we take away support from the least protected? I'm suggesting rewarding those who have really contributed, I reply calmly. That's not conservatism, that's fairness. Fairness? His voice rises. What about those who didn't have the same opportunities? Who were born into poverty? Who faced discrimination? Peregrine, Cordelia interrupted, let's not start a political discussion over dinner. But he's already started. No, I want to understand. Julian, do you really think that people who are less fortunate than you deserve less support in old age? I think luck has very little to do with success, I say. I was born into a family of plumbers. My father worked 6 days a week to provide for us. I started working at 16, paid for my own education, never took out a loan I couldn't pay back. So you don't need to tell me about privilege. Peregrine snorts. The classic story of independent success. But times have changed, Julian. It's much harder for young people now. Really? I raise an eyebrow. When I was young, we didn't have half the conveniences we have now. There was no internet to get information instantly. There were no smartphones, no social media, no streaming services. We worked more and complained less. Dad, Cordelia intervenes with obvious irritation. You sound like a cliché. Maybe, I agreed, but that doesn't make my words any less true. Peregrine shakes his head. You just don't understand modern realities. The cost of living has gone up, wages can't keep up with inflation, housing is unaffordable. And yet you live in a house that's twice as big as you need for two people, drive an expensive car, and I don't remember you ever denying yourself vacations or restaurants, I say, not holding back. So don't tell me about poverty. There is a heavy silence in the room. Peregrine's face is frozen in an expression of righteous anger, and Cordelia looks like I've hit her. Fine, she says at last. Let's change the subject. I nod, deciding not to continue the argument. After all, what good would it do? We'll never agree on anything. Peregrine grew up in a family of university professors who always voted left and talked about social justice over dinner with other intellectuals. He'll never understand my point of view. How's your work going, Cordelia? I ask, trying to change the subject. A lot of insurance claims lately? My daughter works as an insurance adjuster, assessing damages for the insurance company. It's not the most glamorous job, but it's stable and well paid. It's okay, she answers succinctly. Lots of small jobs, nothing major. I can tell she's still hurt, but I keep trying to make conversation. And how's Samantha? Still working with you? Samantha is a co-worker of hers that she's mentioned often in the past. She left 3 months ago, Dad. I told you. Maybe you did. I don't remember. Not because I have memory problems, but because these conversations are often so superficial that they just don't stick in my mind. The rest of dinner is spent awkwardly trying to keep the conversation going. Peregrine talks about a new succulent exhibit he's organizing. Cordelia mentions a movie they saw recently. I nod and make appropriate comments, but the tension doesn't go away. After dinner, Cordelia collects the plates, refusing my help. Sit down, Daddy. I'll manage. Peregrine and I remain at the table. He twirls his wine glass in his hands, clearly uncomfortable. I apologize for the tension, he says finally. I'm just passionate about social issues. I've noticed, I reply dryly. He sighs. It's just that the world is changing, Julian. What worked for your generation doesn't work for us. I want to tell him that every generation thinks they are unique in their problems, that hardship is part of life, not the exception to the rule, that the responsibility for one's life lies first and foremost with the individual, not with society or the state. But I'm not saying anything. There's no point in reopening the argument. Cordelia returns from the kitchen, wiping her hands with a towel. I made coffee, she says. And I have cookies from that bakery you love, Daddy. I don't remember mentioning any particular bakery, but I nod gratefully. We move into the living room where Cordelia is pouring coffee into cups. Dad, she begins after a pause, Peregrine and I wanted to talk to you about something. This is it, the real reason for their visit. I tense up inwardly, but outwardly remain calm. I'm listening. Cordelia exchanges a glance with her husband, and he nods subtly. You see, we've had a financial necessity, she says carefully, choosing her words. Our roof needs urgent replacement. The recent rains have shown that it's leaking in several places. It's very unpleasant, I comment neutrally. Yes, it's terrible, Peregrine says. And insurance won't cover such repairs because it's considered natural wear and tear, not sudden damage. I nod, waiting for them to continue, though I already realize where they're going. We've gotten several estimates from contractors, Cordelia continues. The lowest was $15,000, and that's just for materials and labor, not including any possible extras if they find any hidden problems. Sounds expensive, I said. Very, she agrees. And, We're not in a good place right now. Peregrine mentioned budget cuts at the greenhouse, and my company has frozen raises for this year because of the economic situation. I silently wait for her to finally get to the point. Anyway, Daddy, Cordelia takes a deep breath. We were thinking, maybe you could lend us the money to fix the roof. It would be a loan, of course. We'll pay it back as soon as we can. There it is. I knew they weren't just here to have dinner and talk. They always come when they need something, and it's almost always money. 15,000 is a significant amount of money, I say slowly. We know, Peregrine replies quickly, and we wouldn't ask for it if it weren't absolutely necessary. But the roof isn't something you can put off. If it leaks more, the damage will be much greater. I look at both of them. They look genuinely concerned, but I can't help but notice the new watch on Peregrine's wrist or Cordelia's designer bag she's put in the hallway. These people are clearly not living from paycheck to paycheck as they try to portray. I'll think about it, I say finally. It's a serious amount of money and I need to check my finances. I can see the disappointment flicker across Cordelia's face. She was clearly hoping for immediate agreement. Of course, Daddy, we understand, she says, trying to hide her reaction. It's just, the sooner we can start the repairs, the better. I'll let you know in the next few days, I promise. That closes the subject, but the atmosphere becomes even more strained. I see Peregrine glance at his watch, clearly anxious to leave. Cordelia looks impatient, too, as if their mission wasn't the success they'd hoped for and there's no point in lingering now. Soon they're getting ready to leave. Cordelia kisses my cheek, promising to call me next week. Peregrine shakes my hand, his grip less confident than when they came in. I stand on the doorstep watching them get in the car and drive away and feel a strange sense of relief that they're gone and bitterness that our relationship has been reduced to this. Awkward dinners and requests for money. Back in the house, I start putting away the remaining dishes. My thoughts return to their request. $15,000. I have that money. I've always been frugal, and over the years I've saved enough for a comfortable old age. But the point isn't whether I can give them that amount. The point is that this isn't the first time they've come with their hand out, and it probably won't be the last. They call it a loan, but I'm well aware that this money will never come back to me. Just like the $8,000 I gave them for a kitchen remodel 2 years ago never came back to me. Or the $6,000 for a vacation on Cape Cod last year, when Cordelia was on the verge of nervous exhaustion and really needed a vacation. I set the last cup on the shelf and look at the kitchen. Perfectly clean, just like the rest of my house. Orderly. Under control. Unlike my relationship with my daughter, which seems to have always been a little chaotic and complicated. Maybe I really have been a bad father. Maybe I worked too hard and wasn't emotionally available enough. Or maybe some people are just like that, always wanting more, never appreciating what they have. I don't know the answers to these questions. I only know that tomorrow I have to make a decision, whether to give them money or not. And whatever I decide will affect our already fragile relationship. It's been 2 weeks since that awkward dinner. I decided to give Cordelia and Peregrine the money, not the full $15,000 but $10,000, explaining that it was the maximum I could afford without jeopardizing my savings. They were disappointed but accepted the sum with ostentatious gratitude and promises to return it as soon as the opportunity arose. I didn't expect to see that money again. Afterward, Cordelia called and invited me to Sunday lunch. "It's the least we can do as a thank you, Daddy," she said with an enthusiasm that seemed excessive to me. I agreed, though I would have preferred to stay home with a good book. Social interactions bore me more and more as I get older, especially those filled with falsity and ulterior motives. On Sunday, I dressed carefully. My best pants, an ironed shirt, a tie I rarely wear. Not that I was eager to impress, but my mother had always taught me that one should dress respectfully for family dinners. Some habits can't be changed even after decades. I hailed a cab since I haven't driven in years. My reactions are no longer the same, and I decided it would be irresponsible to endanger other road users. It was not an easy decision to give up the independence that one's own car gives, but a necessary one. Cordelia and Peregrine's home is located in one of Wilmington's more upscale neighborhoods, a large colonial mansion with a manicured garden and wide driveway. Too big for a couple without children, but they've always sought ostentatious prosperity. I suspect their mortgage makes up a large part of their monthly expenses. When the cab pulled up to the house, I immediately noticed the roof. There was no sign of the renovations that had begun. No scaffolding, no materials, no workers. I wonder, I think, where my 10 grand went. Cordelia opens the door before I can ring the bell. She looks flawless. Her hair is styled, her makeup is perfect, and she's wearing an elegant dress that I'm sure is worth more than my entire closet. "Daddy," she's hugging me. "It's so good of you to come." Her enthusiasm seems contrived, but I return the hug. "Hello, Cordelia. Thank you for inviting me." She leads me into the house, and I immediately notice the changes in the living room. A new sofa made of expensive leather, a couple of fancy chairs that weren't there before, and a large rug, obviously handmade. The money for the roof has obviously been diverted to nicer purchases. "I see you have new furniture," I comment, unable to help myself. Cordelia tenses slightly, but quickly restores her smile. "Yes, there was a sale. Unexpected good fortune. Peregrine, Daddy's here." My son-in-law appears from the kitchen, wiping his hands with a towel. He's wearing an apron over an expensive shirt. Peregrine likes to play the home cook, though I suspect Cordelia does most of the cooking. "Julian, welcome." He extends his hand to shake. "How was your trip?" "Without incident," I answer. The cab driver knew the way. "Great, great." Peregrine nods with the kind of condescension many people show to older people, as if successfully arriving at your destination is an accomplishment. "I'm making my specialty pasta. I hope you're hungry." "Quite," I say, although I don't really have an appetite. "How are the roof repairs coming along?" There's an awkward silence in the room. Cordelia and Peregrine exchange quick glances. "Well, you see, Dad," Cordelia begins cautiously, "we've decided to delay the start of the work a little. The contractor we chose is busy on another project, and we're going to have to wait a few more weeks." "I see," I said, not showing that I could see through the lie. "I hope the roof doesn't leak more during that time." "Oh, we've patched the most problematic areas with temporary repairs," Peregrine adds quickly. "Everything's under control." I nod, deciding not to pursue the subject further. What's the point? They're adults, and if they'd rather spend money on new furniture instead of necessary repairs, that's their choice. Although it does show how sincere their tearful pleas for help were. "Let me show you what we did to the backyard," Cordelia offers, clearly wanting to change the subject. Peregrine had put in a new flower bed. Considering his experience in the greenhouse, the result is impressive. I follow her through the glass doors to the terrace. The backyard has really been transformed. New flower beds with exotic plants, stone paths, even a small pond with carp. All of this had undoubtedly cost a lot of money. "Very nice," I say. And it's true. Peregrine, for all his faults, really knows his plants. Dinner's almost ready. Peregrine calls us from the house. "Let's get to the table." We go back inside and are seated in the dining room. The table is set with a pretension of sophistication: crystal glasses, silverware, linen napkins. Peregrine serves seafood pasta, salad, and fresh bread. Everything looks impeccable, like in a cooking magazine. "Wine, Julian?" he asks, picking up the bottle. "A little, please," I answer. With my medication, it's best not to get too carried away." Of course, of course." He pours me literally 2 fingers. Health comes first. We start eating, and the food is really good. Peregrine didn't seem to brag about his culinary talents for nothing. "It's delicious," I say sincerely. "You're a great cook, Peregrine." He smiles, clearly pleased with the compliment. Thank you, Julian. I've always said that if it weren't for my passion for botany, I'd be a chef. Daddy, Cordelia said, putting on her salad, how have you been lately? What have you been up to? The usual, I answered. Reading, walking, sometimes watching documentaries. You, remember to take your meds? She asks, with that special tone she uses when she's trying to sound caring, but really just condescending. No, Cordelia. I use a pill box with compartments for each day. It's not complicated. How's your memory in general? She continues. Do you notice any problems with it? I'm starting to realize where this conversation is going, and I'm getting alarmed. My memory is perfectly fine. I remember events from 50 years ago as clearly as I do yesterday. That's typical of the elderly, Peregrine intervenes with the air of an expert. Long-term memory is retained, but short-term memory begins to suffer. Have you ever noticed that you forget where you put things, or lose the thread of a conversation? No, I answer firmly. Not at all. Cordelia exchanges a glance with her husband. Daddy, we've noticed that you've been getting a little distracted. Last time we were here, you didn't remember that Samantha quit, even though I told you about it. Maybe I just didn't remember that information because it didn't seem important, I parry. It's not a sign of dementia, Cordelia. It's a sign of selective attention. We're just worried about you, she says with an expression of feigned concern. You live alone, and if your memory really starts to fail, it could be dangerous. What if you forget to turn off the stove? Or you take the wrong medication? I'm not going to move into a nursing home if that's where you're going with this, I say bluntly. No one's talking about a nursing home, Peregrine replies quickly. There are plenty of other options, like an aide to come to your home, or perhaps a guardian to help with financial and medical decisions. That's it. Now I realize the true purpose of this lunch. They want to gain control of my finances. I don't need a guardian, I say firmly. I'm fully capable of managing my affairs on my own. Of course, Dad, Cordelia agrees, but her tone says otherwise. But it's better to think about these things before it's too late. I've made a will, appointed trustees to make medical decisions if I become incapacitated, and organized my finances so that everything is in order, I explain. My attorney has all the necessary paperwork, so your concerns are unnecessary. You don't understand, Dad, Cordelia sighs. This isn't about the will. It's about what's happening to you right now. We've noticed that you're starting to change. In what way? I asked, feeling my anger rising. You've become more suspicious, she says, more irritable. Last time we were at your place, you accused us of only coming when we needed something. Isn't that true? I ask bluntly. Cordelia looks shocked. Peregrine frowns. See, he says, this is what we're talking about. This unfounded paranoia, this hostility. That's not you, Julian. It's your age talking. I look at both of them and see that they really believe what they're saying, or at least they've convinced themselves of it to justify their actions. I'm perfectly sane, I say calmly, and I'm not going to discuss the matter further. Dad, please. Cordelia tries to take my hand, but I pull away. We're doing this out of love. We want you to be safe. And your finances are safe, Peregrine adds with a serious look. At your age, it's easy to fall victim to scammers. It's amazing how they don't see the irony in their words. I appreciate your concern, I say, even though it's a lie. But I'll say it again. I'm legally capable and don't need a guardian. Cordelia casts a desperate look at Peregrine, as if asking for help. He nods slightly, then leans toward her and begins to whisper something in her ear. I can't hear the words, but I can see the movement of his lips. Years in the courtroom have taught me a lot of things, including lip reading. I'm no expert, but I can make out just enough, especially when the speaker isn't trying to hide his words from outsiders. Don't beg him. If he won't give us money, we'll get a guardianship and manage his house ourselves. The old man's out of his mind. Any doctor will attest to that. I feel a cold rage rising inside me. So this is their plan. Declare me incapacitated so they can get control of my house and savings. And they've already discussed it with some doctor? Cordelia listens to her husband's words, and I see her expression change. First shock, then uncertainty, and finally determination mixed with guilt. She's conflicted with herself, but this is obviously not the first time she's heard this plan. I sit still, not showing that I understand their intent. It's better that they think I'm in the dark. Cordelia turns to me, and her face is different now, harder, more determined. Dad, we need to have a serious talk about your future, about how to manage your finances. My finances are fine, I answer calmly, and I manage them myself. But it can't go on forever, she insists. Sooner or later, you're going to need help. When that time comes, I'll turn to professionals, I say. Financial advisors and lawyers, not relatives with conflicts of interest. Cordelia's face turns red with anger. Conflict of interest? Are you implying that we want your money? Don't we? I ask bluntly. Isn't that why you came here last time? Isn't that why you have new furniture instead of a repaired roof? How dare you? Cordelia jumps up from her chair. We care about you. We're thinking of your welfare. And my house and my savings, I add. That's a very convenient coincidence, isn't it? You're becoming unbearable, she says, her voice shaking with rage. A selfish, suspicious old man who doesn't value his own family. Family? I raise an eyebrow. The same one that visits me once every few months and only when they need something? That's not true, Cordelia shouts. We'd come more often if you weren't so complicated. Complicated, I repeat. Interesting word. What exactly is complicated about me, Cordelia? That I see right through you. That I don't let myself be manipulated. You see? She turns to Peregrine. That's what I was talking about. He's getting paranoid. He thinks everyone is against him. Peregrine nods with the look of a man whose theory has just been confirmed. Julian, you have to realize that it's not okay to think your own daughter wants to deceive you. What else would you call a plan to declare me incapacitated in order to take over my property? I ask, still calm. If not deception, then what? They both freeze. There is shock on their faces. They didn't expect me to know about their plan. What are you talking about? Cordelia finally asks, trying to look puzzled, but I can see the panic in her eyes. I'm talking about your little plan, I answer, the one you were just discussing, about getting custody of my house. Dad, you're delusional, Cordelia says, but her voice is shaking. No one said anything like that. I look at her with disappointment. Even now that I've named their plan outright, she continues to lie. My daughter, the one I raised, the one I sacrificed so much for, is willing to declare me crazy for money. Something inside me is breaking, the last thin thread that ties us together as a family. I get up from the table. I'm leaving, I say calmly. I'll call a cab. Dad, sit down, Cordelia demands. We're not done talking. I'm done, I reply, pulling out my phone. She grabs my hand so sharply that the phone falls to the floor. You're not going anywhere until we get this resolved. I look at her in surprise. Never before has she been physically aggressive with me. Take your hand away, Cordelia, I say quietly. No. She squeezes my wrist even tighter. You're going to stay and listen to us. We're doing this for your own good. I try to get free, but she's unexpectedly strong in her anger. Let me go, I repeat, louder. What's the matter with you? She screams. Why can't you just trust us? Why are you always so stubborn, so selfish? And then, without warning, she punches me in the face. The blow is so sudden and hard that I lose my balance and fall to the floor. My head hits the floorboards, and for a moment black spots swim before my eyes. Cordelia is standing over me, her hand still raised, shock at her own actions on her face. Peregrine looks stunned, too. He hadn't expected this turn of events. Oh my God, Cordelia whispers. Dad, I didn't mean to. It was an accident. She takes a step toward the door, clearly about to leave to get away from what she's just done. And that's when I start laughing, quietly at first, almost inaudible, but gradually getting louder. It's not a merry laugh, it's a bitter, almost maddening sound born out of pain, frustration, and sudden release. It's as if the last illusion has crumbled and everything is crystal clear. My laughter startles Cordelia. She freezes, her face pale. "Daddy?" Her voice trembles, not with anger but with fear. I rise slowly from the floor, still laughing. My cheek burns from the blow and my head throbbing with the pain of the fall. But I feel a strange clarity I haven't experienced in years. "You always forget," I say, and my voice trembles, but not from weakness, from restrained strength that I can read lips. "I know what he said to you." Cordelia and Peregrine froze like two statues. Their faces were shocked and disbelieving. They clearly hadn't expected to hear me say that. Cordelia turned pale and Peregrine took an instinctive step back, as if trying to distance himself from the situation. "What do you mean?" Cordelia finally squeezed out. Her voice shook, revealing the panic she was trying to hide. "What lip reading?" I rubbed my cheek, still burning from the blow, and slowly straightened up. Despite the pain and humiliation, I felt strangely calm. The moment of truth I'd been subconsciously waiting years for had finally arrived. 39 years in the courtroom, I said, looking directly at Peregrine. "You know what happens when you sit there day after day, writing down testimony. You start to notice the little things, the way people get nervous about lying, the way lawyers exchange glances, the way witnesses rub their clothes when they're hiding something." I paused, watching their reactions. Peregrine was trying to remain unfazed, but his fingers were tapping nervously on his thigh, a gesture I'd noticed in many liars in court. "And I learned to read lips," I continued. "Not professionally, of course, but enough to know what happens when witnesses or lawyers whisper when they think no one can hear them." "That's ridiculous, Dad," Cordelia tried to object, but her voice sounded uncertain. "You couldn't—" "Don't beg him. If he won't give us the money, we'll get a guardianship and manage the house ourselves. The old man's out of his mind, any doctor will tell you that," I repeated, word for word what Peregrine had whispered. "That's exactly what you said, isn't it, Peregrine?" My brother-in-law's face turned purple. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Cordelia shifted her gaze from me to her husband, her eyes widening with surprise and fear. "It's not what you think," Peregrine finally said. "I was just suggesting an option, a last resort. If your condition worsens—" "My condition," I repeated with a bitter chuckle. "My health or my financial situation? Which one are you really worried about?" Cordelia stepped toward me, trying to take control of the situation. "Dad, look, we're really worried about you." Peregrine may have put it poorly, but our intentions— "Your intentions are crystal clear," I interrupted her. "They've been clear for a long time, which is why—" I slowly pulled out a small black dictaphone from my inside jacket pocket. Modern, digital one of the few technological gadgets I'd mastered in recent years. I began recording our meetings, their faces contorted with shock. Cordelia instinctively covered her mouth with her hand, and Peregrine clenched his fists, a gesture I'd seen in many defendants when their lies were exposed in court. "You were recording us?" Cordelia said incredulously. "Without our permission? That's illegal." "In this state, the consent of one party is sufficient to record a conversation," I answered calmly. Basic legal knowledge I had acquired over the years. "And yes, I recorded our entire conversation today, including what you said about me being paranoid, your punch, and of course Peregrine's plan to declare me incompetent." I picked up the recorder and hit the play button. Our voices filled the room, first the discussion of dinner, then the gradual buildup of tension, the conversation about my supposedly deteriorating condition, and finally my question, What else would you call a plan to declare me incompetent to take possession of my property? Then Cordelia's denials, the sound of falling when I fell after her punch, and my laughter. I stopped the tape. A heavy silence hung in the room. You planned the whole thing, Cordelia whispered, looking at me with an unfamiliar expression, a mixture of fear and respect. You provoked me on purpose. I didn't plan anything, I countered. I was just prepared. There's a difference. I was hoping I'd never have to use those tapes, that you would prove me wrong in my suspicions. Peregrine, recovering a little from the shock, tried to take control of the situation. Julian, let's talk like reasonable people, he began, in that condescending tone he always used with me. I may have misspoken, but you misinterpreted what I said. We are truly concerned for your welfare. Stop it, Peregrine, I interrupted him. No more lies. I didn't record just today's conversation. I have recordings of all our meetings over the last 3 years. I pulled a flash drive out of my other pocket. All the files are here, including that conversation 6 months ago when you were discussing how you'd sell my house after I died to buy a country cottage, or the time you whispered in the kitchen that my senile quirks were costing you your inheritance, or when Peregrine called me an old cheapskate who clings to money for too long. Cordelia's face contorted with horror. She remembered those conversations exactly and now realized that her words had been recorded. Why did you do it? She asked in a trembling voice. You didn't trust us all this time. Should I have? I answered the question with a question. Cordelia, I've been a stenographer for almost 4 decades. I've recorded hundreds of cases of family conflicts, inheritances, cases of financial abuse of the elderly. I've seen people who swore they loved each other turn into predators when it came to money. I've seen children manipulate parents, spouses cheat each other, relatives contest wills. I paused, feeling an old ache rise in my chest. I had hoped it would be different with my family, but your visits became less and less frequent unless you needed money. Your calls dwindled to formal minute checks. You never asked about my thoughts, feelings, memories, only about my health and finances. Cordelia slumped in her chair, her shoulders slumped. That's not true, Dad. We cared about you. Maybe, I agreed. But caring was secondary to waiting for the inheritance. And yes, I started recording our meetings out of caution, an occupational deformity, if you will. Peregrine, seeing that denial was futile, changed tactics. All right, Julian, he said, straightening up and assuming a businesslike appearance. What do you want? What are you trying to accomplish with these records? First of all, the truth, I answered. No more pretense, no more fake concern and ulterior motives. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my inside pocket. And secondly, I want my money back. What money? Cordelia asked, confused. All the loans I've given you over the past few years, I explained, unfolding the paper. 10,000 for the roof repair, which I see has not started. 8,000 for a kitchen remodel 2 years ago. 6,000 for a vacation last year. 4,000 for a new car for Cordelia. The total amount, including the interest that was stipulated in the receipts you signed. We never signed any receipts, objected Peregrine. No? I raised an eyebrow. What about those insurance papers you signed every time you took money from me? The ones you never read because you trusted me and were in a hurry to get the money. I remembered how carefully I had drafted those documents, using my knowledge of legal wording from years of courtroom experience. How I discreetly included clauses about repayment, interest, and deadlines. How they had signed without reading, certain that Cordelia's old father was incapable of such trickery. Peregrine's face contorted with anger and humiliation. He was a financier, a man who prided himself on his business acumen, and the realization that he had been duped was particularly painful. It's a fraud, he gritted his teeth. You tricked us into signing those papers. Fraud? I grinned. No, Peregrine. Fraud is when you took money from me to fix the roof and spent it on new furniture. Or when you planned to declare me incompetent to take my property. What did I do? I just gave you documents that you should have read before signing. Any court would agree with that. You can't seriously think we're going to give you that money back, Cordelia said. They were gifts, help from a father to his daughter. There would have been gifts if you'd asked about it directly, I replied. If you'd said, Daddy, we need money for new furniture. But you lied. You manipulated. You portrayed extreme need when really you just wanted more comfort. And now you're claiming they were gifts? I shook my head. No, Cordelia. The documents clearly stated that they were loans to be repaid. And I have all the evidence that the money was not used for its stated purpose. Not just the recordings of our conversations, but the pictures of your house before and after each loan, the checks you carelessly left in plain sight when I visited you. Peregrine looked like he was about to have a stroke. Cordelia just sat there, arms dropping limply. What do you want? She finally asked quietly. Money? You know we don't have sums like that. You have a house that's worth a lot more than you owe me, I pointed out. You could sell it, pay me off, and buy something more in line with your real income. You can't seriously, Peregrine began, but I raised my hand to stop him. I've already filed the paperwork with my lawyer, I said. Tomorrow he'll send a formal demand for repayment of the loans. You'll have 30 days to respond. If you refuse to pay, the case will go to court, where all the evidence will be presented, including records and documents you signed. I paused, watching them realize the gravity of the situation. Of course, you can try to challenge the documents, claim that I misled you, but then we'll have tapes of you discussing how you tricked me into fixing the roof, where you plan to declare me incompetent to control my finances, and of course, the videotape of Cordelia hitting me today. The videotape? Cordelia questioned in horror. You videotaped it too? I patted my breast pocket where there was a small camera disguised as a tie pin, another modern device I'd learned to use. Like I said, an occupational deformity. When you watch people lie under oath for decades, you begin to appreciate reliable evidence. Cordelia looked broken. Peregrine stood beside her, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. Why are you doing this, Daddy? Cordelia asked, tears in her voice. We're your family. No, Cordelia, I answered quietly. Family is people who love and respect each other, who support each other not out of self-interest but out of caring, who don't plan how to divide a still living person's assets or discuss how to declare them crazy for money. I looked at her with sadness. You are my daughter by blood, but you and Peregrine stopped being my family long ago when you started seeing me as nothing more than a wallet and a future inheritance. It's not fair, she whispered. We cared for you. Did you? I raised an eyebrow. Then why didn't you ever ask about my life, about my memories, about the work I devoted 4 decades to? Why were the only questions you asked about my health and finances? Cordelia remained silent, unable to find an answer. I'll give you a chance to avoid public humiliation, I continued after a pause. Return the money within 30 days and I won't sue. Sell the house if you have to, or the car, or find another way. But if you default on the loans, I'll be forced to proceed through the courts. You'll ruin our lives, Peregrine said, his voice not a plea but a statement of fact. No, I objected. You ruined it when you thought you could manipulate an old man with impunity, when you decided that trickery and deceit were acceptable ways to get what you wanted, when you forgot basic respect and decency. I slowly put the recorder and the papers back in my pocket. You underestimated me, I said quietly. Like so many others. You saw an old man and thought I was weak, naive, easily manipulated. You forgot that I've spent decades watching the worst of human nature in the courtroom, that I've seen hundreds of schemes and deceptions far more sophisticated than your primitive attempts. I headed for the exit, but stopped in the doorway and turned around. And the sad thing is, Cordelia, I always hoped you'd be better. That you'd inherit your mother's honesty and integrity, not the cynicism I'd acquired over the years. I guess I was wrong. Daddy, she began, but I raised my hand to stop her. No more pretenses, Cordelia. We both know the truth. It's just a business relationship now. 30 days to pay back the loans. After that, it's court. I left the house without looking back. It was cool outside, and I buttoned my jacket to protect myself from the evening wind. The recorder in my pocket was heavy as a rock, a physical reminder of the gravity of my actions. I pulled out my cell phone and hailed a cab. While I waited, I looked at the house where my daughter and her husband were probably now feverishly discussing what to do next. Part of me felt hurt that our relationship had ended this way. But the other part, the more rational part, realized that there had been no real relationship for a long time. There was only an illusion that I maintained for fear of being all alone. The cab arrived 10 minutes later. I sat in the back seat and gave my address. As the car moved, I didn't look back at Cordelia's house. It was the end of one chapter of my life and perhaps the beginning of another. On the way home, I thought about the future, about what I would do with the money if they actually returned it, about how my life would change now that I had finally lost touch with my only daughter, about whether I had been too cruel. But then I remembered the look on Peregrine's face as he whispered about how they would get custody of me. I remembered Cordelia's hand raised to strike, and I realized that I'd done what I had to do, protect myself from people who saw me not as a person, but as a means to an end. I spent 39 years recording other people's stories in the courtroom, stories of greed, betrayal, manipulation. I never thought I'd be part of one of those stories, and I certainly didn't think I'd be forced to use all the lessons I'd learned from observing the dark side of human nature against my own daughter. But life rarely goes according to plan, and sometimes the most important battles have to be fought with those we love. It's been 3 months since I exposed Cordelia and Peregrine's plans. 3 months without a single call from my daughter, without the usual Friday night conversations, without awkward visits. The silence, which at first seemed deafening, gradually became familiar and even comfortable. In those months, my life changed. Not radically, not suddenly, but consistently and noticeably. I still live alone in my house in Wilmington. I still wake up at 7:00 and turn off my alarm clock 5 seconds later. I still read the newspaper and take my daily 2-hour walk. But new elements have been woven into this familiar routine, giving my days new content and purpose. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I lead a creative writing group for seniors at a local community center. The idea came out of the blue. After the Cordelia incident, I felt the need to rethink my life, especially the decades spent in the courtroom, decades of absorbing other people's stories but never telling my own. The center was initially wary of my suggestion. What could a court stenographer, a person who professionally recorded other people's words but didn't create his own, know about creative writing? But I explained that it was my years of observing human stories that had given me a unique understanding of how they are structured, what details make them alive, how truth is intertwined with perception. There are now 8 regular participants in my group. Eleanor is an 82-year-old former teacher with a sharp mind and a penchant for historical novels. Harold is a 78-year-old retired sailor who writes about his travels with amazing detail. Mabel is a quiet widow who, through writing, expresses for the first time the grief of losing her husband. The others, too, come with their stories, their memories, their need to be heard. We meet in a small room with a round table. I bring cookies I buy at the bakery on the corner. Eleanor always brings a thermos of tea. We write on assigned topics: first memory, a life-changing moment, a person who taught me something important. Then we read aloud and discuss what we have written. No criticism, just questions and acknowledgement. Surprisingly, it was in this group that I first started talking about what I had seen in court. Not specific cases, of course. Confidentiality remains sacrosanct. but general patterns, observations, lessons about how people justify their worst behaviors, how fear and greed can distort even the closest relationships, how the truth is often hidden in the unspoken. The first day I shared these thoughts, a silence hung in the room. Then Harold nodded and said, "You've seen people at their lowest ebb, haven't you?" I agreed. "And it changed you," Mabel added. It was not a question, but a statement, spoken with the understanding that can only come from someone who has also been changed by deep experience. Gradually, through these encounters, through my own writing, I began to sort out how decades of observing human tragedies had shaped me, how I built walls around myself to protect myself from the pain I saw daily, how that defense had become a habit, a way of life, a prison that not only kept the pain on the outside, but kept real intimacy from getting in. I never told Cordelia about the gravity of my work. When she was little, I wanted to protect her from the horrors I recorded with my quick fingers on the steno machine. I didn't want her to know about the mother who drowned her children in the bathtub, or the husband who abused his wife for years, or the teenager who killed his parents over an inheritance. As she got older, the habit of keeping quiet about her work had already taken root, and then it was too late. The wall between us was already there, invisible but solid, built of reticences and defense mechanisms. I couldn't explain to her why I had become so closed off, why it was so hard to trust people, why I was so skeptical of human motives, and she couldn't understand what kind of person lurked behind this facade of restraint and order. At the end of May, I received official notice from my attorney. Cordelia and Peregrine paid off the entire debt, $28,000 with interest. To do so, they had to sell the house and move into a much smaller apartment in a less upscale neighborhood. The lawyer reported that the money was paid in one installment, with no disputes or attempts to dispute the documents. I experienced no triumph upon receiving this news, only fatigue and a strange sense of completion, as if the last page of a long book had finally been turned, and now you could close it and put it on the shelf. A week after the notice from the lawyer came a letter from Cordelia, a real paper letter in a stamped envelope, something rarely seen in this digital age. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, neat, with a slight slant to the right, the same as the school notes I'd signed years ago. I didn't open it right away. I put it on the living room table first and went on with my day as usual. The letter waited, silent and patient, like so many truths in my life. In the evening, after dinner, I finally picked up the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside were several pages written in the same familiar handwriting. "Dear Dad," the letter began, and those two simple words sent a sudden wave of emotion through me. "I thought long and hard before writing to you, started and threw away drafts several times. What can I say after all that has happened? How can I find words that won't sound empty or hypocritical? We sold the house. You probably already know that from your lawyer. Now we live in an apartment on the east side of town. It's small, but it's adequate. Peregrine found a new job, no longer at the greenhouse, but at a garden center on the outskirts. It pays less, but he seems more relaxed there. I'm still working for the insurance company, although I've had to give up some of the privileges I had. But I'm not writing about our new housing or job. I'm writing because I've been thinking a lot about us over these months, about the way we were, about what we have become. I won't apologize, Dad, not because I'm not sorry. I am, deeply and sincerely. But because I realize that some things can't be undone with a simple, I'm sorry. What Peregrine and I planned to do, it was wrong. The way we used your help, it wasn't fair. And the fact that I hit you, that was unforgivable. But more than for those specific actions, I regret the years of missed opportunities, for all the conversations we never had, about all the questions I never asked about your work, your thoughts, your life. You were right when you said we haven't been a real family for a long time, but I think the problem started much earlier than you think. Not when we started seeing you as just a source of money, but much earlier, when we stopped seeing each other as people. Remember when I was about 12 and I asked you about your job? A real question, not just, how was your day? I remember you replied, I just write down words, Cordelia. Nothing interesting. And something in your tone, in your look, told me that the subject was closed, that there were things we weren't talking about. And so the walls between us began to appear, small, barely noticeable at first. But every year they got higher and thicker. You didn't talk about your work or your thoughts. I stopped sharing my real feelings and fears. We talked, but we didn't socialize. After my mom died, it got worse. She was the bridge between us, the translator who helped us understand each other. Without her, we found ourselves on opposite sides of the abyss, not knowing how to build a new bridge. I'm not saying this to justify my actions or to shift blame. I'm just trying to understand how we came to that moment in their home when I raised my hand to my own father. How could a daughter and father become such strangers to each other? I recently started seeing a therapist. It was Peregrine's condition for our continued life together after everything that had happened. I resisted at first, but now I'm grateful for it. We talk a lot about childhood, my relationship with you and my mom, and the patterns I repeat in my adult life. She asked me once, what do you know about your father's work? Not about what he did technically, but how it affected him emotionally. And I realized I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about what it was like to sit in court day after day, writing down the most horrific stories of human life, how it shaped your worldview, your character, your fears. I started researching, reading about court shorthand, about the psychological impact of working in the justice system. And gradually, I began to realize that perhaps your aloofness, your skepticism, your need for control and order were not just character traits, but defense mechanisms developed through years of observing the worst of human nature. You were protecting yourself from pain, and I interpreted that as coldness and indifference. You saw my and Peregrine's actions as self-interest and manipulation, and you were right, they were there. But I saw your suspicion as confirmation that you had never truly loved me. We both looked at each other through the distorted lenses of our own fears and expectations. I don't know if there's a way back for us, Dad. Perhaps some bridges are burned forever. But I wanted you to know that I understand a little more now, about you, about myself, about how we lost each other long before the day I raised my hand to you. I'm not asking for an answer. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for a rebound. I just wanted you to know that you were right about a lot of things, but not everything. We both contributed to the wall between us, and we both deserved better. Sincerely, Cordelia. I reread the letter twice, then folded the sheets neatly and returned them to the envelope. A strange feeling swept over me. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a kind of understanding. For the first time in years, Cordelia saw me, not as an ATM, not as a burden, not as an obstacle, but as a person with her own history, her own wounds, her own defense mechanisms. I didn't answer the letter. Not because it didn't touch me, but because I wasn't sure I could say something that wouldn't sound hollow or fake after so many years of understatement. Some conversations are too late. Some confessions come when the road has already been traveled too far in the wrong direction. Instead, I did something I had been putting off for far too long. One day in June, I walked into a travel agency and bought a train ticket to Clinton, the small town 3 hours from Wilmington where I was born and raised. I hadn't been there in over 40 years, not since I'd buried my father and sold my parents' house. The agent asked when I planned the return trip. It will be a one-way trip, I replied, surprising even myself with that decision. On the morning of the day of departure, I woke up as usual at 7:00 and turned off my alarm clock 5 seconds later. But next, the usual routine was disrupted. Instead of a thorough shave, I simply ran an electric razor across my cheeks. Instead of an ironed shirt, I put on a comfortable sweater. Instead of the usual breakfast, I simply drank coffee, standing at the window and looking out at the garden, where Agnes's rose bushes were still blooming despite the years without her caring hands. My suitcase had been packed the day before, a minimum of stuff, just the essentials. I didn't know how long I would be in Clinton or if I would ever return. All I knew was that it was time to face the ghosts of my past, to figure out how a small-town boy became a man who spent his life writing down other people's tragedies and walling off his own family with a wall of silence and suspicion. I locked the house, double-checking all the locks. Old habits die hard. A cab was waiting outside. The driver helped me load my suitcase into the trunk. "To the train station," I said, getting in the back seat. As the cab moved off, I didn't look back at the house. There was no need to. Its image was imprinted in my memory, as were all the important places and moments of my life. Instead, I looked ahead, at the road leading to the station, to the train, to the city of my childhood. At 76, I was embarking on a journey not so much geographical as internal, in search of an answer to the question Cordelia had asked in her letter: how did we lose each other? And a deeper question I'd never asked out loud: how did I lose myself in the process of defending myself against the pain I recorded day after day in the courtroom? The train was leaving at 10:30. I took my seat by the window, put the book I had no intention of reading on my lap. As the train moved, I felt a strange lightness, as if the weight I'd been carrying for years had diminished a little. Not gone, such loads don't disappear completely, but a little less heavy, a little more manageable. Outside the window, the scenery flashed by, first the suburbs of Wilmington, then the countryside, the woods, the little stations with half-erased names. I watched, but not so much seeing as remembering. How I had first come to Wilmington as a young man with a stenographer's diploma and a dream of a steady job. How I'd met Agnes at a party at a mutual friend's house. How Cordelia was born, so small and fragile I was afraid to hold her in my arms. And how, day by day, case by case, I had allowed the darkness I had recorded in court to seep into my soul, to cloud my perception, to change me so imperceptibly and gradually that I hadn't even realized when I had ceased to be the open, hopeful young man who had once left Clinton. Now I was coming back, not the same person, of course, but perhaps ready to finally meet the boy I was and try to figure out where and when I'd lost him along the way. The train picked up speed, taking me away from the life I'd built in Wilmington, back to the roots I'd avoided for so long, to the town where I was born, to the home that no longer exists, to the memories that waited, patient and inevitable, like all the truths we try to escape.